thank you for the introduction, and good morning to all of our listeners out there. Thank you for attending what we hope will be an insightful and inspirational session. My name is Aaron Shepard, and I will be the moderator for this amazing panel on building the future space workforce. In the 1960s, a Cold War ignited our passion for exploration with the first space race. We spent the better part of a decade rapidly advancing technology to carry not only 24 people to the moon, but also the collective hope, inspiration, and dreams of our entire species. Now in 2021, it looks like space is heating up again. We have a new rover on Mars collecting rock samples that will soon be returned to our planet. We have plans to go back to the moon and establish a long-term human presence. We have a new telescope that will be able to see further back in time to the earliest days of the universe itself. And we have the incredible achievements being made by members in the growing private space sector, including the upcoming Inspiration4 launch. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it is safe to say that space is heating up again. And I would argue that if you ever wanted to become part of the space workforce, now is the perfect time to join. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of bringing you a diverse panel with members at various stages of their academic and professional careers, from high school to working space professional. Our panelists will share their insights on how to become a part of the growing space workforce. Before we begin, I would like to give each panelist the opportunity to introduce themselves. So starting with you, Anthony, go ahead and take a few minutes and let everybody know who you are, what you do, and your story.
Yeah, of course. So, hi, everyone. My name is Anthony Razo. I am a 22-year-old from Los Angeles, California. I attended the University of Redlands, and my story kind of begins there. So at the University of Redlands, we didn't have an engineering department. And I was interested in a lot of engineering-based things. So, I liked planes, trains, fighter jets, and everything that basically moved. But we didn't really have a program that was suited for that. So what I ended up doing was founding a rocket propulsion laboratory there. I started with about 6 people in a classroom, and all we did was meet and talk about how rockets work. We didn't have $1 to our name, nothing. Over the years, I ended up growing that organization slightly, ever so slightly every year, with the ambitious project of building a rocket every year with a whole $0. But that never deterred me, and that never deterred the team. So eventually we became a chapter of SEDS. We came in contact with the Students for the Exploration and Development of Space. It's a national organization with chapters all across the country. They have some significant resources in the way of getting started and, kind of staying connected to the space community and finding ways to get that experience without necessarily breaking the bank or learning about new things that you may or may not be interested in the industry. From that, I was exposed to the satellite industry, to the flight test, culture. It really blew the doors open for space. And so I took my little team a little bit about halfway across the country to Phoenix, Arizona. I say halfway across the country, but it wasn't really that far. But we went to Phoenix, Arizona for SEDS' annual conference. And that was an experience that my team and I will never forget. It was our first conference. We finally got to meet other chapters from other schools. We got connected with industry professionals, and it really just kind of sparked, our place. Who we started to begin to find who we were as a team, as an organization, and then from there, I became involved with SEDS USA, the national structure of SEDS. I ended up running for the board of directors at that Space Vision, lost. But then came back a year and was elected to the board in November of 2020. And here we are now. I've been working with and for SEDS for the last however many months. And it's been an absolute ride getting to meet people from all over the industry, all over the world, and opening access to space for everybody.
Wow. Wow. Everybody like, wow, this is, and trust me, everyone on this panel is amazing. So you're going to hear me say wow a lot because it's truly just an honor to be in this space with so many, just the future of space is bright if you can gauge it from this very small sample. So our next panelist is one of my dear NASA buddies. We actually met at Langley. She's incredible. And I'm going to let her introduce herself. So go ahead, Andrea.
Hello, I am Andrea Lloyd. I had slides, but I can do without. So, here they come. So a little about my as a total math and space geek. Like at 8 years old, visited NASA, fell in love. I wanted to be an astronaut, marine biologist, or an English teacher. That was my goals growing up. And by time I went to university, I went to Texas A&M University. And when I started with a math degree. I didn't know what science I wanted. I still loved the idea of being in science, maybe astronaut, maybe biology. All I knew is that the language of science is math. So I started there. Little did I know that by the end of my first semester, I would fail calculus and give up on that dream. And so then I was going through the list of majors, like which ones don't need more than calculus and don't require a foreign language. And that landed me with a telecommunication media studies major, bachelor's of science, where I learned some computer coding, I learned social media, public relations, everything in between. In the last year, so my junior year of college, we had a visitor who came and gave a presentation about NASA and what a public affairs officer was. And everything just kind of aligned in the universe in that moment. Oh, I can still do science. I can still be a part of it. I was so excited. And after that, I just ran with it. I worked with the aerospace engineering department at A&M, being a student worker, trying to get some experience there. Worked a little bit with a rocket propulsion team, trying to do their social media there. And after I graduated, I ended up going to NASA Langley for an internship where I met Aaron. And I had a blast at my internship. It was amazing. I learned so many different things. I worked with so many people. I was used to being the only communications person on a team. So I went from being the communications person to being a part of a wonderful team of communications and what that feels like. And from there, I didn't know what I wanted to do yet. I knew I wanted to be in space and I wanted to do science. And so I started my master's program. And I applied to a lot of different ones, and I landed at the University of Texas. It wasn't my first choice. It wasn't my third choice, but it's where I ended up needing to be. I worked with an amazing professor, and my thesis was about public relations with NASA over the past, 60 years, and how it's changed over time, what that looks like, things like that. And after I graduated this past spring, I am now a science communicator for the Landsat program with the USGS. Next slide, if we can. And so my big spiel that I always tell people is anything that advances science is science. It could be political, talking to policy, things like that. It can be sitting in the lab. It could be writing the tweet that tells everyone about what the guy in the lab is doing. This book by Bruno Latour that I read in undergrad changed my view, changed my life, and basically, you can just summarize it as anything that works towards the advancement of science is, in fact, science. Next slide. And so you have this picture of me when I was 10, and I could never dream of being able to use my English skills and my love for science in the same place. And oh no, over a decade later, that's so many years, Aaron. Over a decade later, here I am on this Space Young Professionals panel where I get to talk to all of you about how you don't have to just be an engineer, just be a STEM major. You could be a lawyer, you could be a chef. There's so many places to go with STEM, and there's so many different ways to be in the industry. So that's my speech.
Yes. Oh my God. Yeah. First of all, it is. We're getting old up there, but we're no longer the youngest people in the room. But that's okay. But I am going to transition to the youngest member of our panel, who is doing things as a teenager that I would only dream of. most teenagers, sit around and play Halo or Zelda or whatever, but Owen has done some pretty incredible things. So go ahead, take the stage, Owen, and tell the audience who you are, what you do, and a little bit about your journey.
Hi, I'm Owen Welch. I'm a senior in high school currently, and don't get me wrong, I do play my fair share of Halo and Zelda in my free time. But I'm also just in love with space and science and math, and I've just been enjoying where that's been taking me for the past 4-ish years now. So my story really started when I was in the 8th grade, and I attended the White School. And at that school, we were basically taught that if children aren't told that they can't do something, they'll never know that they can't. So we were building satellites and attending space settlement conferences and doing these amazing things at such a young age. And from there, it just propelled me to do even more and more and more. So as a 13-year-old, I launched a CUBE satellite called the WISAT, where we studied extremophile bacteria in the environment of space, which was amazing once I figured out what extremophile bacteria were, because I had no idea. I was an 8th grader. But I learned more, and I started to just build up my career with amazing people around me. From there, I've attended space advocacy meetings and called on Congress. One of my current projects right now is a lunar rover that we are hoping to launch in the next couple of years to test lunar dust mitigation. And my biggest takeaway from all of this is just finding the right people to be around and having the right support system with you to work with like-minded people and do amazing things that you don't know you can't yet.
All right, man. Well, we're gonna have to link up. We'll trade gamer tags, and because
Definitely.
Oh, man. And the last member of the panel that I'm going to introduce, and certainly not the least, is a dear friend of mine. We actually worked on the Mars generation together. We did a panel at this conference a few years ago, and she is incredible. She is a graduate student at Cornell. She has her own startup. She sent things to the International Space Station. Let me stop talking. I'm going to let you do the talking. Morgan.
Thank you, Aaron. Hi, everyone. I'm Morgan. Like Aaron said, I'm currently a PhD candidate in soil and crop sciences at Cornell University. And interesting enough, I also have a NASA Langley connection. I did a mentorship there in my high school years because I'm originally from that area of Virginia. So it's great to see other NASA Langley connections as well, because I just love it there. Next slide, please. So back in 2016, I founded my company, Deep Space Ecology. And this was an interesting time because I actually founded the company attending my first Humans to Mars conference in 2016. So it's kind of serendipity and full circle how I'm back at this point. And it was really at Humans to Mars where I realized there was this niche that wasn't being filled in the realm of space agriculture and talking about sustainability and resiliency when it comes to how we would develop an agricultural food secure system in space. But even before the founding of Deep Space Ecology, next slide, please, I was performing research in space agriculture, and pretty much this research was what helped influence the creation of Deep Space Ecology. So I did my undergraduate years at Duke University down in Durham, North Carolina. And during that time, I was trying to figure out a way to connect environmental science and space exploration together, because I've always been a very outdoorsy person. I've always asked questions about how ecosystems work, very interested in why soils are different colors, why a plant can grow out of cement, et cetera, et cetera. So I very much was interested in ecosystems, and then the space exploration side, being in an area that had NASA Langley. My father did his master's with space research and physics. So I had these influences growing up as well, and these passions, but I didn't really know how to connect the two together. And that's where I learned about closed ecological systems for space habitation during my winter break in my sophomore year back in the winter of 2014, where it was definitely a soul-searching moment. I was having a rough time at that time of my life, and I found this paper from the 1960s by some Soviet Union scientists who had done this research on closed ecological systems called the BIOS experiments. And so I decided to run with it. This was the connection that I was looking for to combine environmental science and space exploration, even medicine together. And so I started this research. I did a bunch of research independent studies with 3 graduate professors at Duke University. And did this large-scale Mars agriculture experiment. And next slide. And out of this experiment, with Deep Space Ecology, founding Deep Space Ecology, I also had a patent that came out of this where I developed something called a quasi-closed agroecological system. So pretty much I learned everything that could be learned about closed ecological system research and history. And I started bringing in ecological theories and principles and the environmental science that I was learning and the biology that I was learning, and designed this new model for how to solve some of the challenges that we had been seeing in these systems throughout the last 50, 60 years. And so next slide. With this knowledge that I was developing, with this experiment that I performed, and with the founding of my company, Deep Space Ecology started working on solving food security issues in the deep spaces of Earth, the Moon, Mars, and beyond, doing designs like this to show what could potentially be possible if we really work on the science, if we really work on the research and development. To better understand how to develop ecological systems. Next slide. And so these are just a few cool pictures of those early years of Deep Space Ecology and what I was thinking and visualizing and what I was driving my science towards. Next slide. And nowadays, I'm looking further at integrated field ponics agricultural systems, not only for space, but also here on Earth as well. I realized throughout my journey that the challenge of extreme environment, changing environment agriculture isn't only a space challenge, it's also a challenge here on Earth. So Deep Space Ecology became this new space company with both an Earth market and a space market that feed into each other and work to bring the space industry and the agricultural industry together. Next slide. And you can click once. Yeah, so out of all this research, out of everything that was happening, something that I started to realize was the importance of soil when it came to food security and space and Earth agriculture. Here on Earth, 95% of our soil, 95% of our food comes from the soil. So I was curious about how we could go from something like this, you can click again, to something like this. And next slide. And interesting enough, this was actually, back one slide. Interesting enough, this was actually from my Mars agriculture experiment, where I went from this Mars regolith simulant to what's on the right side of the slide. So this is the same geological substrate. It's just during this experiment, what I was really looking at is how do we start developing biogeochemical cycles from scratch, the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, introducing organic matter, things like that. And so next slide. I started working with my company to further develop the Earth side of the market, which now is called Evercroft. Next slide. And really challenging the space industry to really look at food security as we see it here on Earth, looking at the different dimensions of food security, such as availability, having access, utilization, stability of the entire system. So it's been many great years that I've been working on this challenge, and it led to me, next slide, eventually coming to Cornell University for my PhD in soil and crop sciences, because like I said, I realized how important soil science is to developing field-based agricultural systems here on Earth and in space. And so I really wanted to explore this a bit further. Next slide. And so my research here at Cornell specifically looks at bacterial adhesive mechanisms and organomineral interactions in soil aggregates and their effects on soil organic carbon persistence under Earth gravity and microgravity. And that's a lot. I can definitely break that down at some point, but we don't have enough time. So next slide. So with my research, I've actually sent the first natural earth soils as well as biochar growth media into space. Next slide. So you can see some of the pictures from October of last year, where we sent the Soil Health in Space experiment up to the International Space Station. And you can see astronaut Kate Rubin there with one of our samples. So that was really cool. Next slide. And just with something this big, it requires a lot of contribution, a lot of collaborators. So there's a lot that happens behind the scenes with experiments and with building a company, building a career in whatever you may do. Next slide. And then Aaron mentioned that I sent something to space recently, and I did. In 2019, I was awarded the Ken Susan Memorial Spaceflight Student Competition Award, and then things happened over the last year and everything got delayed. And then finally, this last month in August, I was able to send more soil into space via a parabolic flight with Blue Origin. So that was really rewarding and is a great complement to the International Space Station experiment. And I'm hoping to generate a paper out of this so everyone can read about the data and conclusions that I'm drawing from this. Next slide. And then finally, I share all of this journey, everything I go through with the science, with the business, all of that on my social media. So I do a lot of science communication as well. And I'm done. So thank you very much.
Yes. Oh my God. Thank you. I am low-key jealous because you've launched something to the International Space Station. Like, an astronaut has touched something that you have worked on. That is like mind-blowing to me. So one of the things that I think draws so many of us to spaceflight is that it requires every ounce of human ingenuity that we can give. I mean, think about the story of Apollo 13. A team of some of the brightest minds in the world literally had to figure out how to make a square peg fit into a round hole in order to bring our astronauts home. I think it's safe to say that if you want to work in space, you have to learn how to make a little or how to make a lot with a little. And as you're about to hear from our panelists, they've had to create their own conventional paths to bring them closer to their dreams of working in the space industry. So, Owen, I'm going to start with you, because as a high school student, you've done things that are truly extraordinary. And if my research is correct, you have actually helped launch a satellite in space before you were old enough to drive a car. How important do you think it is, especially for our younger audience members, to learn to try new things in pursuit of their dreams?
Honestly, I think that is probably the most important step that you can take, because like I said during my introduction, not knowing that you can't do something pretty much means that you can. So taking these steps to try and do all of these new things and just attacking problems that you think are interesting is massive in developing your dreams and doing great things. And just but just doing things and trying and failing and learning from those mistakes and then continuing to try over and over again until you do get it right is just honestly the only way that I know how to solve these problems and to continue to propel myself down the path that I want to take. So it's honestly like riding the bike. You're not going to know how to do it innately. It's not a human thing, the same way launching something to space isn't a human thing. We don't evolve to know how to do that. But like riding the bike, if you keep trying and falling and trying and falling, eventually you're going to stabilize yourself and you're going to know how to ride that bike. So as a young child with all of the potential in the world and all of these great things in your future to attain, just continuing to try is the only method of attack that I know to achieve your dreams.
Wow. And so in that, so one thing that I did is I went and I watched your TEDx talk. And something that stuck out to me was you discussed instant gratification and how instant gratification is not as important as working towards a big goal. And I think that that message is so important, especially in today's age of TikTok, where everything happens fast in under 30 seconds, and Twitter, where you only get 120 characters. So what advice can you give to our younger audience members who are part of that instant gratification generation to learn how to accept the process of growing and innovation and the fact that it doesn't come easy? And like you said, we don't naturally know how to do these things. We have to learn over time.
So even I still struggle with the instant gratification and with all of these problems. And one of the best things that I have done for myself in the past 6 months was delete TikTok, delete Instagram, delete Snapchat, get rid of all of this social media, because like we're talking about, it is just instant gratification. You swipe, you see something you enjoy, you swipe, and you keep getting this over and over again. And it's these dopamine and pleasure receptors in your brain that keep going off and off. And it's programming you to just want to continue to swipe because it's the easiest path to getting this enjoyment. And it's nothing that's going to help you going forward in life. So my first advice would be to delete it. Get rid of it. It's not helping you do anything that you actually want to do in life. My next advice would be to understand, like you said, that it's going to take time to do these things. When I launched my satellite, I did come in on the back end of the process, and I was with a team that had been working on it for 2 years now, but it still took another 1 to 2 years to actually get the satellite up. And it's tough to accept that these goals are long-term and you're not going to be gratified in a month, 2 months. It's going to take years to do these things. But understanding that when you finally get to that 1-2 year mark where you do achieve your goal, it's so much more gratifying than any 6 second, 30 second, 1 minute video that you're going to watch on your phone. And you're going to be so glad that you took the time and understood and completed the process the right way.
Yes. Wow. Thank you so much for your insights. Like you said, it is something that being a little bit older now, being a little bit more mature, I've learned to look past the instant gratification, but especially, yes, as a teenager, when you're really developing, when you're really trying to figure out what you want to do and how you're going to do it, it may be beneficial to step away from the social media and learn to appreciate the long-term process. Because again, that is, with innovation and everything else, you just have to accept that it does not come easy. So speaking of innovation and non-traditional roles, I want to transition to you, Andrea, because you have a very unique role, or you provide a unique role in the fact that a lot of us, when we think about space and think about careers in space, we're only seeing it from a technical side, not a communication side, not an artistic side. We're only seeing it in one lens. So can you talk about how one finds these non-technical roles, whether it's communication, arts, etc., in a field like space, based off of your experience? Because I think that there are some members in the audience who, like you, will get to a point and realize, hey, I don't want to do math all the time because this is hard. So can you elaborate on how to find these non-technical roles within the space industry?
Yeah, so to start out, there's probably about 3 or 4 roles that you can name when you think of space industry. You can think of astronaut, probably Capcom, engineer, and scientist. And after that, we kind of forget, or we just assume like, okay, those are the 4 things you can do if you wanted to be in space. But that's 100% not true. Space is an industry, and by definition, there's thousands of things you can do. You can be in communications, you can be a graphic designer, you could be a lawyer even, or business to business or business to consumer management. If you can think of it, should be in the space industry somewhere. And it's a matter of trying to find where those things are, where those niches are. And so how I found my job with the USGS is I looked up different contractors that the government was using, and I looked up when those contracts were awarded and where those jobs can be found. And so I went from a very much step-by-step. I knew that this company and this company and this company all work with NASA, and so they have to work with other science organizations. And it can be very nitty-gritty when you start talking about it with that approach. And so if anyone has questions, you're welcome to message me anytime. I will do my best to help. But just thinking about, who do you see working in space? It doesn't have to be NASA. It doesn't have to be USGS. You could look at Boeing. You could look at SpaceX. You can look at, I forget every company. Blue Origin. And if you've ever seen a commercial by someone, if you've ever seen a tweet written by someone, if you've ever seen a technical legal document created, someone had to make those, and their forte was not in engineering and science, most likely. Or they were trained in that, and so now they can translate it to this other part of the industry that they use. And so whenever people try to find these jobs, it can be tricky because it's not the flashy rocket engineer that everyone thinks about. But with a little bit of digging and persistence, you can definitely find them, and they're out there, I promise.
So actually, in your response, you answered the next question that I had for you, which was talking about what other places can you look besides NASA. You mentioned Boeing, you mentioned your position with the USGS, you were talking about any of the big contractors, SpaceX. So now I'm going to flip the script and ask you a little something different. As a communications major, what do you think was your most valuable experience in communicating space? Like, what's the one thing that you wrote about, tweeted about, that just made you go, wow, space is awesome, and I want other people to know that too?
Only one? You're limiting me to only one, Aaron?
I'm afraid so. We gotta keep the schedule going.
I feel like you only know this because, or you only chose this question because you know it's about you. My favorite thing I have ever written, it blew up on Twitter, was about the space robots, the soft robots. And so when I wrote the story, it was about Aaron and some other people on his team working with these non-metal soft robots. And I went to my editor and said, like, hey, am I allowed to reference the Marvel Universe? Like, can I talk about Doc Ock from Into the Spider-Verse to explain how this all works? And she's like, I don't see why not. Like, it will be fine. No one's going to sue NASA. And so it was amazing to see. I wrote that story, and then my spring internship actually ended. And so the week after my internship ended, the main NASA account picked it up and shared it. And so then from there, it blew up and went everywhere. Space.com shared it. The Guardian over in the UK shared it. My favorite headline, am I allowed to share that, Aaron? Or are we keeping a better audience here?
Let's message her for the favorite headline. We laughed about this one. It is a little, it's fun, but it's just message her privately if you want to know that. And that'll encourage people to connect with you online. So yes, go to @SciComm Andrea.
If you want to know the favorite headline that is not G-rated, that someone shared about space robots, it was very funny to see, like, wow, that it's so interesting how people connect and they take something that you wrote and change it just a little bit to make it something they wrote, but all the science is still accurate. It was so cool to see so many different people pick it up and love it and want to talk about soft robots. Like, the only reference I had to soft robots was that Into the Spider-Verse movie. And I think that's one of the first movies that I remember besides Baymax, from Big Hero 6. So that was a really cool story that I've really loved to share.
Yeah, and I think you're hitting on something too. And I think it's beneficial for all the audience members who want to advocate publicly for space, whether personally or professionally as a science communicator, is finding these cultural references that make space relevant. So you can say, oh yeah, NASA's working on these cool robots, and people will be like, oh yeah, sweet. But when you say NASA's working on these robots and it's very similar to this character from the MCU, now you've created a frame of reference and everybody
Exactly.
can latch onto the idea, and it helps make it all relatable, which again is the goal as a science communicator.
It makes it relatable without dumbing down the topic, which is one thing that I'm huge about. You don't want to dumb down the science. You just want to bring the science to the table and say, hey, this is how it works. Where's your frame of reference? Let's build from that. And so that's how I approach science communication. And that's what my goals are always whenever I try to do communication in anything.
Yes, so for the aspiring science communicators out there, take note and please connect with Andrea. Like, she is world class at what she does, truly. I've seen it myself. I can vouch for it 100%. Switching over to you, Mr. Anthony. Mr. I built my rocket team from the ground up. You started a SEDS chapter. It was not there before you, and after you, it is doing incredible things. Now, can you talk about the mindset and the mentality that you had to develop in order to elevate your school's program to the level that you did?
Yeah, totally. This is an interesting question. It's probably one of my favorite questions. Okay, check it out. Here's the deal. When you're facing some dire circumstances like that, okay, so you have a goal, right? Say, let's use this exactly as an example, right? I'm sitting there, right? And I'm like, I see the University of Southern California, right? They're the first student program to pass the Kármán line, access to all types of resources, huge partner with a lot of industry like leaders. So like, I know that they have sponsors from Lockheed Martin, Boeing, all the big defense contractors and agencies. And here we are with diddly squat, right? But it didn't matter, even though I'm sitting here with nothing, I said, okay, that's the target. That's the goal. I'll give these folks 15. I'll give myself whatever time I have here, and I will get as close as humanly possible, right? And that's nuts, right? Like, to think, okay, I'm gonna do all this in like 4 years? Crazy, right? Not gonna actually happen. But every day you wake up and that's it. That's what you're doing, right? That's what's going on. There's no compromise. There's no maybe I'll let somebody else. No, you do it. You get it done, right? And the problem with that, right, is that you can get tired, you can get fatigued, and that's okay. That's natural. That's supposed to happen, right? You're going to get deterred. I mean, I can't remember how many times I went to my university, predominantly white institution, little black kid going up, hey, can I have a couple $100 for rockets? And they told me, why don't you have a bake sale? And then that radicalizes you. And then it becomes a different ball game. Now it's, okay, I'm gunning for you. Now I'm coming after you. And so it became kind of this mentality like sports, like any other professional athlete, right? You come with it. I came with it like Kobe Bryant, day in and day out. I was always the first one there and the last one to leave, because that's what it takes, man. That's what it takes in order to do the things that you really want to do. If you have some crazy dream, and even in the back of your mind that you're like, there ain't no way, man, this is like, this one's nuts, right? You ever have those ideas where you're just like, I don't know about this one, man, right? It's those ones where, okay, let me go Mamba mode, because there is no other compromise. There is no other backup. There is only the objective, right? And so, end of the day, I'm either getting to that objective or I'm not. And I'd rather be getting to it than not, right? And the only way that you're not going to be getting to that objective is if you don't try. It may seem like, oh yeah, I'm putting up 60-point games a night. It's not like that. It's very small things, but it's doing them all with that intensity, with that dedication, whether that's just, sending an email, sending a thank you email to somebody who maybe spoke at your university, right? It's all just about the way you approach the game. And so that mentality to answer that question is essentially Mamba mode. There's no compromise. There's no going back. You just hit it, and you hit it hard every single time.
Wow. Okay. Like, dude, if this were 300 and we were geared up, I would like charge into a wall after hearing that. So what advice do you have for the audience members? I think you touched on this. Is there anything else you would like to impart to the audience who may be in a situation like you, where you don't have the USC money and you've got a piece of string and a paperclip and you need to launch that past the Kármán line? Like, what advice do you give to students who are facing that situation, or what additional advice can you give?
Well, if you're trying to launch a piece of string and a paperclip past the Kármán line, make sure you have a strong enough motor. I'm just playing. But get connected. Get connected is like first and foremost, I would say. Like, start making friends. Start kind of like getting to know who's who. Pay attention to the industry, right? Start making friends at other universities. And one of the best ways to do that is through SEDS. Shameless plug. Sorry, not sorry. Been here for like 40 years. Please, if you want to get those space resources, hit us up. But really do get connected, right? And I heard Owen say, like, get rid of social media. And I would say at this point, when you get to that point in your journey, bring it back, because that's when you need to like look at Twitter. You need to be looking at, who's doing what. So a lot of what I did was Twitter, right? Like, I just kind of stayed on Twitter a lot, and that's how I found SEDS. I probably wouldn't have found SEDS without Twitter, right? So on the other hand is that you can use these apps and these social media experiences to gain those connections, right? And then you monitor, you see what everybody's up to, right? You kind of just check, oh, okay, Tori Bruno is doing XYZ over at ULA. Elon is out in Texas doing XYZ. And then you start to kind of follow the engineers themselves. And you're like, oh, this is what this guy's working on. I kind of like that. Or like you find out, hey, Andrea's doing science communication over at NASA. That seems really cool. I kind of want to do that, right? Like, so you start to you build this little network of the space industry in your head, and you kind of begin to navigate it, and you gravitate towards whatever it is that you find interesting. I found a lot of stuff interesting. So I went one way, I went like defense way, and then I came back, and then I went human exploration, and then robotic exploration, and then I came back to the middle, and now I'm like SEDS, and I'm like, gosh, I don't know what to do next, but it's all viable. It's all viable. So that's it. Basically, just stay connected.
Oh man, yes, good message. I love it. Morgan, now, one thing that I find so fascinating about your story is that your work is truly novel, and you are operating on the bleeding edge of human knowledge, which I imagine is difficult because you're asking questions that don't have answers on Google. Like, you can't find it on the first page, and you ain't gonna find it on the second or the third page. How do you manage to keep innovating in your path despite being one of the few people in the world that's actually walking it?
Yeah, that's the question, really. So definitely in those early years when I was an undergraduate, finding mentors became very important. And the mentors that I ended up finding were 3 graduate professors at Duke who were working in like systems ecology and biology and soil science and had never done space research before. But when I cold emailed them, because especially as an undergraduate where you don't have this network that a lot of space industry professionals have later on in their career, cold emailing, cold calling becomes a skill unto itself. And so I did that with these professors and asked them, it's like, I'm interested in this. How would you like to put a space twist on the knowledge that you've been developing all these years? And that's where you start to have these interesting collaborations happen. And this is where you create multidisciplinary projects where you have people from different backgrounds, different industries, different academic fields come together to answer these challenging questions that don't have the literature backing that a lot of other research projects have. So with our International Space Station experiment, that was the first time that natural Earth soil and biochar had ever been sent to space. And so it's daunting in that usually with research experiments, you have research that has already been done. So you can be like, okay, here's the baseline for where the research is. Here are the gaps in knowledge. Here's data that I can compare with to see what my data looks like. In my case, some of that doesn't exist yet. So my paper that comes out of this is going to have some of those first details about certain gravity mechanisms for bacteria, for soil system dynamics, things like that. And so it's definitely, it brings on imposter syndrome. It brings on, there have been tears, stress, anxiety inducing tears, especially as well when you're doing space research and doing some of the first space research, when you make that mistake and you're like, oh, I should have known better. And now I can't go back because it cost me over $100,000 to send some soil samples into space. And you just can't repeat that easily. So you kind of have to, just like Anthony was saying, kind of just go at it and hit the ground running in these situations. And it's good to like accept that you made mistakes and that you're learning and that you're on this cutting edge and that you're one of the first people really exploring this area. But realizing that failures, mistakes are an opportunity to begin again with more knowledge than you had before. Failure is an opportunity. And now that I have this knowledge, now that I've had these experiences, I can develop better research. I can develop more thorough research. I can help other students who are interested in this field, as well as other like tenured researchers who are starting to come into this space side of their research with methodology development, because I've made the mistakes or I've made the successes for these different things. And now I can share this knowledge. And that's something that I think is very important and not really done in academia a lot, is being open with and sharing knowledge. Having open access to these things. It can be very competitive, especially when you're on the cutting edge, because you want to be like the first one to publish, or you want to be the first author on research papers. But ultimately, my goal, at least, is to develop this knowledge and to gain this knowledge so that no matter where humans may find themselves here on Earth in space, that they're going to live in systems that are safe, that are stable, that are resilient, so that they can thrive and have good well-being, both physically, mentally, emotionally. And so I've learned that, especially when you're on the cutting edge of research, finding mentors, even if they're not exactly doing what you're doing, but believe in you and are willing to tell it to you straight out of support for you, is very important. And then being open about it, because being open about the knowledge, what you're working on, can help invite other people with resources, with ideas, with knowledge that you didn't realize you needed to come into the space and help you push that boundary. Because it can't just be one person pushing the boundary. We need as many people as we can, so that we can make sure that wherever we may be, our food systems are secure.
All right, so we're going to transition to some audience questions. I know, moderators, if you're watching, let us know how much time we have. I know we're running low on it. The first question, and I think this one is for you, Morgan, is are there any insights on what closed loop systems may be used for future Mars missions in terms of food provision and how it can be integrated with the main habitat module?
Yeah, so there's a lot of ideas out there when it comes to what these systems may look like. And I'm actually one of the subject matter expert judges for NASA's Deep Space Food Challenge. So we've been doing all the judging of those proposals. So I've been exposed to additional ideas that are interesting and even a little bit new for me as well, and ways that I'm like, I could actually help them with this because they need to consider this. So that's a very diverse, interesting, complicated question. But it could be everything from a field-based system to integrated with hydroponics, aeroponics, aquaponics systems. It could be having some prepackaged food provisions for emergency situations. But ultimately, what you want to do is have Earth independence, have sustainability and resiliency against potentially multidimensional disturbances that come into your system, so that your crew can survive and can thrive in this kind of environment. Pretty much, you want to make a system that is very similar to what we have here on Earth, where our ecological system helps buffer us and gives us the ability to adapt to when disturbances happen. So it's a complicated question, that one.
Okay, next question. And let's see. This one, actually, I'm going to ask this most recent one that came in. When is a good time to seek an internship at NASA, college or high school? Andrea, I think you may be the expert for this one.
All right. The answer is yes. So whenever you're ready to apply, go for it. I applied after I graduated from my undergrad, and then again while I was in graduate school. But I was working with someone who was a high schooler, and they were amazing and had passion, and they were really good at the skills they had. They were working with communications. It wasn't as specialized as mine was because I was already working towards a degree, but they were already getting experience in the space industry and being exposed to things beyond STEM. I know there was someone else who got involved and realized, oh, I can do STEM, or I can do STEM communications, or whatever it is. So get the exposure you need. There's no early time to apply. You can, as long as you're, I want to say you have to be 18 and in high school, go for it. Start applying.
Okay, and probably the last question that we'll get to, this has been an amazing panel, and this is for anyone who wants to take it. How do you perceive that your respective generations are to, how do you perceive your respective generations are to the real exploration or space exploration and sciences? So I think the question is, how open do we think our generation is to continuing space exploration and science and pushing the limits of human knowledge that way? And we have like a minute, so guys, please feel free to answer quickly.
All right, I'll take it real quick. I think that my generation is kind of divided. I think that there is a group of people who are very open and very interested in space, and then there's people who have no idea what's going on. And I think that's because of divides in social media, where you have people who are in love with Elon Musk and all that he does, and then people who just don't even understand the future missions and what we're trying to do, and that we're even trying to go to Mars. So I think that there really is a divide, at least from my perspective, in space travel and knowledge with it.
Okay, and I think if we've got one more, we've got like a little bit of time left, so if anyone wants to jump in, please feel free to go ahead.
Yeah, I think especially kind of like my generation, where we're kind of somewhere in between, like kind of made it into the 90s babies, kind of didn't. Yeah, I feel like we're perceptive towards it. We definitely see a lot of the good that space can do, where when you have satellites that map the planet, satellites that can analyze how global warming is affecting the planet, but at the same time, we are seeing that kind of uptick in what people are believing is like the new space environment, where it's just like only rich people get to go into space. And that's becoming kind of a prevalent issue, I would say. A lot of people are like, oh, space is only for the rich. When it does, it's just going to take people like Andrea, like Morgan, like Owen, and like you, Aaron, where we just need to show the world a little bit more that space is being used every day for very, very practical and very, very important reasons.
If I can run with this, is that okay, Aaron?
Yes, we just got permission from the mods to go a little bit longer. So
I think I have lots of thoughts on this. And part of this was like in my thesis of why we go to space and what's important about it. But I think what my perspective is right now is that we need to bring space to Earth. And that one thing that I do with my current job at the USGS is we create free and available data products so scientists can use remote sensing satellites to do whatever they need to. Ecologists, biologists, all sorts of people who aren't usually space related. Morgan probably understands Landsat. Right to your home laptop. And so you don't need to go find a giant supercomputer. You can just work with what you have right at home. One thing that I've learned recently is that you can, I as a non-scientist can go download an image of my house from space from this free government satellite. Like, how cool is that? We need to talk about how we can bring space to Earth. And Morgan's presentations about how it relates to Earth and space, they're doing a beautiful job explaining all of that. And I think as we bring space to Earth, we can also bring Earth to space.
Yeah, on that topic, if I may, real quick, I think it is really important to show people that there are applications of space, like Anthony was saying, and like all of you were saying, and even the project that Morgan is working on, just showing people, because the biggest argument that I hear for not going to space is, oh, we have too many problems here on Earth that we need to solve first, when they don't realize that going to space does solve so many of our problems here on Earth, whether it's water filters, food sources, or communication, just finding ways, phones, exactly, communication, just understanding that so much of what we do in going to space is going to help us here on Earth. And I think that would be the best way to truly galvanize our nation behind the space industry and show them that it is important to go.
And there's so many basic things that we use, like predicting weather 3 days out, or sorry, more than 3 days out, or how there's a hurricane hitting right now. We have the reason the National Hurricane Center was created was to predict hurricanes for launches in the 1960s. So there's so many different applications that space brings to Earth. We just never think about it because all we think is a boot on the moon in the 1960s.
Right. And even then, even if you take the 1960s as an example, in the Cold War, right, and how space has evolved beyond that realm of kind of using space in wartime, one of the biggest things we can do is we can use task reconnaissance satellites to check on humanitarian crises. That's one of the biggest things we do with satellites. So we use satellites to save lives in instances.
Yeah, I think ultimately what we're all saying here is communication of the connections is vital, and showing how if we solve this problem in space, it also solves this problem on Earth and vice versa, and how it all comes together. Because we focus on the flashy, the in the moment things, or like the person, Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. And it's like, how many people in the public actually understand the missions, actually understand the process that happens with the actual people who work in the company, and not just who Jeff Bezos is. So it's really how we communicate, how we bring forward the story, how we bring forward these connections, and how we all benefit from them. So ultimately, we need to work on our communication. And that's what we're all doing here right now. We're working on our communication by spreading this information.
Yes. Now, thank you so much to each of our panelists for sharing your insights on not just how to build not just how to become a young space professional, but how to promote space to the next generation. This conversation, we would love to keep it going, but unfortunately we have to wrap it up. And with that, everybody has their social medias except for Owen because he doesn't believe in social media. Yeah, I take a shot at you, but please feel free to connect to our panelists. Please feel free to reach out to Explore Mars for our contact information, and we'll be happy to talk to you in the future. Thank you so much. Guys, go out there and inspire and do great things in space.
We're on it.